sets your range another 3,000 feet. Another way to extend your range of travel is if you come across a narrow corridor or alley, you could put a rope or wire across the wall and it makes an entrance, which makes it your home. And then it gives you another 3,000 feet that you could travel. This is interesting. Lifting and placing an item down was regulated so not to appear as work. For example, you could lift something in a private place, never mind what a private place is, and put it down in a public place, but you could not lift something in a private place and put it down again. You were allowed to lift in a wide place and put it down in a legally free space. Apparently, even rabbis are conflicted to what a legally free space means. You were not allowed to carry anything that was heavier than a dried fig, but you can lift something twice that was half the weight of a dried fig. Interesting. There's more. I wanted to show a lot of interesting ones. Tailors weren't allowed to carry a needle, so they would be tempted to sew. Scribes could not carry their pens, so they can't write. Students, this is popular for students, couldn't carry their books, so they can't study. So I guess if I was a Jewish Orthodox, that would be good on the Sabbath day. Fires couldn't be lit unless it was already on from the previous day, and equally you can't take it out. That's why Orthodox Jews today use electronic timers for the Sabbath, so that their electricity would turn on without them having to flick a switch. You weren't allowed, here's the good one, you weren't allowed to improve someone's health condition unless they were in danger of dying. Healing of any kind, unless to save life, was forbidden. First of all, I wonder how they decided if someone was on the brink of death. Could you really say to somebody, I think he's about to die? No, he's going to survive one more day, I think. We could heal him tomorrow. Can you believe that? You were not allowed to heal someone, make their condition better on the Sabbath day. And this is all from the Talmud. 39 things that were commonly forbidden: sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, sifting, grinding, sifting with a sieve, kneading, baking, shearing wool, washing wool, beating wool, dyeing wool, spinning wool, putting in the weaver's loom, and the list goes on and on and on. I think this is why Jesus said, if you look at the Synoptic Gospels in Matthew, the chapter right before it, before this event, this is what Jesus said. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. I don't know about you. I don't think I have to live in that day to find out what a pain the Sabbath day is. Can you imagine having to prepare on Friday till sundown, because the seventh day is Saturday, by the way, on our calendars? Can you imagine having to do all this, preparing everything just so that they could do nothing on Sabbath? It's a big pain, a burden, I think. And I think this is why Jesus said this to the people. Crazy, right? But these things are not made up. Now, without condemning their interpretations of the law, I don't want to say that they're wrong. But it seems to me that what they created the Sabbath to be was so far from what God had intended it to be, which was a day of rest. Instead, it was just simply a day of burden. Now, the Pharisees, what we can say is the Pharisees held these Sabbath laws in high regard, obviously. The system of works, because that's what it was proof of their righteousness. It just became a way to show off how good they were by following all these little rules. Unfortunately, it missed the point of God's love. You understand that? They were so focused on doing all these little things because they believed that if I do this, I become holier. That I am better in God's eyes. That I will earn my way into salvation. This is why the Sabbath was so important to them. And this is why they are so upset that Jesus is breaking their laws on the Sabbath day. So let's look back at our text. And we're just going to go verse by verse so that we can get a better picture of what's happening here. So starting from verse 1 and 2, it seems, It says here, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? So first of all, you might be reading this and saying, well, isn't it kind of weird that they're actually picking grains to begin with? Why is Jesus and his disciples walking through a grain field? Now, of course, we can't imagine it today unless we have a little bit of help. Back in the day, back in Galilee, there was a lot of grain fields. And the only mode of transportation then was by walking, right? So they would walk through these grain fields. Now, if you got hungry, there was no McDonald's drive-thru, no KFC, no gas station that you could stop at to eat. And, if you were traveling, you tended to travel light. You didn't carry a lot. So interestingly, and if you want to look this up, in Deuteronomy 23:25, God allows people who are traveling through grain fields, if they are hungry, to eat the grain. This was allowed. This was, in fact, God ordained. So there was nothing unlawful about the disciples eating grain. It was not stealing. Mind you, they're only supposed to fill their hunger. They weren't allowed to get more grain, put it in their pockets, maybe sell it later on. What they were simply allowed to do was, if you were hungry, you were traveling, you could get some of that grain and eat it. So, what is it that the Pharisees say is unlawful? What is unlawful is that by picking the heads of grain, rubbing them, and eating it, what are they doing? They thought they were harvesting. Right? We saw all those laws, all those little Sabbath laws. Since they were doing that, the Pharisees did not allow doing that because you were considered to be harvesting. And that was considered work, and that was considered to be breaking the law of God. Make sense so far? But let's just take a minute, all right? Look at the Synoptic Gospel of Matthew. It says here explicitly, his disciples were hungry. So they were simply filling a need that they had. They were not breaking anything that was God ordained. They were simply hungry. They were not harvesting to make profit. They were just picking the grains because they were hungry, and it was allowed. So clearly, I think you and I can agree that the disciples aren't working, but the Pharisees thought that they were. Now here's another interesting thing. Jesus is going through the grain fields, right? This must be 3,000 feet away from his house, wouldn't you say? But yet the Pharisees didn't accuse him of that. They accused them of harvesting. Because you know why? Because the Pharisees are probably 3,000 feet away from their own houses.
As well.
Because so if they accuse him of that, they are in danger of accusing themselves for the very same law that they're breaking. Can you start to see how hypocritical the Pharisees are becoming? They were zeroing in on something else, but really they were just as guilty of breaking their supposed laws. Interesting, right? But so why do it? Why even bother? Because they were so bent on wanting to discredit Jesus. They wanted to discredit him so badly. Moving on to verse 3 to 4, it says, Jesus answered them, have you never read? First one. Have you never read? Who is he talking to? The Pharisees. Do you think they would have read what he was talking about? Yes. So Jesus is kind of making the point even worse. He's almost being sarcastic. Have you never read? Of course they have. Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Why does Jesus use David to the Pharisees? Well, David was their Old Testament hero. David was the last of the great kings. He was the forefather of the supposed Messiah to come. So to use David as an example was to use somebody who was kind of luminary, somebody like, wow, don't mess with David, don't use him. But Jesus does. And this story, I won't read it here, is found in 1 Samuel 21.